The story begins with two people locked in an intense sparring match. A sharp punch landed on an arm, and the force of the impact rippled throughout the entire training hall. The fighters were the protagonist and his training partner, engaged together in a brutal practice session. After taking several heavy blows, the protagonist's partner finally cried out, no longer able to endure the pain. He admitted that the punches were far too strong and praised the terrifying power behind the protagonist's attacks. Calmly, the protagonist replied that he had achieved a breakthrough to the micro level just 2 days earlier. This led to a brief explanation of the 5 levels of martial arts mastery that existed in this world: basic, proficient, micro level, mastered, and perfect. Upon hearing this, his partner was devastated. He said that no other student in their class could come close to the protagonist anymore, while the protagonist was still prepared to continue training. Exhausted, the partner begged him to stop for now. In the end, he gave up and left, calling the protagonist a complete maniac who thought of nothing but training. As he exited, he said goodbye to Teacher Lee, who calmly reminded him to put on his clothes before leaving. Teacher Lee then approached the protagonist with a serious expression and asked why the 30,000 enrollment fee still had not been paid. The protagonist lowered his head and asked for more time, explaining his family's situation. Teacher Lee sighed and said there was nothing he could do. After practice, the protagonist was left alone and continued training by himself. His heart felt heavy as thoughts of the unpaid fee repeatedly surfaced in his mind. He remembered that his parents had died when he was only 3 years old. Since then, he had lived with his aunt and uncle, who had always supported his path as a martial artist. In a world filled with monsters, becoming a martial artist was an extremely profitable career. Because of this, the protagonist felt deeply distressed about being a burden on his family. Even after relentless training, the protagonist returned to his small, modest apartment. Before entering, he overheard his aunt and uncle talking inside. They were struggling with rent, and there was little money left. Nevertheless, they decided to prioritize paying the protagonist's enrollment fee so that his future would not be delayed. To make this possible, his uncle considered stopping his medication, while his aunt planned to find a second job. Standing silently at the door, the protagonist heard everything, the sacrifices they were making for him. He raised his hand and slapped his own face, forcing a smile so his emotions would not show. He entered and greeted them as usual. His aunt immediately scolded him for coming home so late from training. The protagonist offered to massage his uncle, but was simply told to get proper rest. That night, the scene shifted to the protagonist's small room. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts in turmoil. After a long silence, he made a decision. He would solve everything on his own. If he needed money quickly, there was only one place that could provide it. The next day, the protagonist arrived at a modern building hidden beside a small forest. Beneath it lay an underground fighting arena, a place where the only rule was victory. The announcer's voice echoed throughout the venue as he introduced the fighter of the night, the Minotaur, the protagonist. To claim the 60,000 prize, he would need to win 4 consecutive matches. The crowd watched him and began whispering, thinking he was just a newcomer. The announcer advised him to hype up the audience. He hesitated, unsure of what to say, until the announcer explained that provocation was part of the show. Once he understood, the protagonist shouted that he would not lose, openly challenging anyone brave enough to face him. The audience was stunned by his audacity. Many believed he would be defeated easily, but his words ignited the atmosphere. Cheers and applause roared as the fight was about to begin. Amid the noise, the protagonist remained calm, focused solely on obtaining the prize money. The first opponent entered, a fighter wearing a rat mask. The protagonist observed carefully and immediately noticed a flaw in the opponent's stance. The masked fighter charged forward and threw a punch while the protagonist appeared distracted. In the next instant, the protagonist countered swiftly. His fist landed cleanly on the opponent's face, sending him flying to the other side of the ring. The match ended instantly. The protagonist claimed his first victory and wasted no time, immediately calling for the next challenger. The arena erupted with excitement, awed by the overwhelming strength of the Minotaur. The second fighter entered with contempt, claiming the protagonist's luck would not last. The protagonist gestured for him to attack, intending to test his own strength. The opponent charged without hesitation. The protagonist met the punch with his own fist, and a powerful shockwave burst through the air. The opponent's face turned pale in disbelief. The protagonist knew the truth. His strength had already surpassed this level. Seizing the moment, he delivered a heavy punch to the opponent's face. Noticing the opponent's excessive commitment and exposed waist, he followed with a brutal kick to the abdomen, sending the fighter flying out of the arena and ending the match. Just like that, the protagonist claimed his second victory with ease. He stood alone in the ring, waiting for the next opponent. Inside a luxurious private room, a man in a suit observed the scene. He closed his eyes and remarked that the Minotaur was far too strong for an apprentice. Seeing 3 consecutive victories, he decided to intervene. Quietly, he arranged the final registered match. At that moment, a masked fighter volunteered to enter the ring. The man gave a brief command, instructing him to conceal his true strength. Back in the arena, the protagonist maintained steady breathing. The previous fights had been effortless with his newly mastered fist technique, but he did not lower his guard. He knew that only one more victory stood between him and the 60,000 he desperately needed. Soon, the final opponent appeared. The crowd erupted when they recognized the challenger, the White Fox. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Whispers spread through the audience, calling him a quasi-martial artist, a level beyond ordinary fighters. For many, allowing such a match crossed the line. The protagonist understood the fight would not be easy, but retreat never crossed his mind. The White Fox approached with a faint smile, relaxed and confident. He told the protagonist not to worry, as he knew how to stop his punches. As both warriors took their positions, the announcer declared the final match. The bell rang, and they charged at each other. Without hesitation, the protagonist launched a full power punch. The White Fox met it head on, blocking with his own fist. When their fists collided, the protagonist felt terrifying strength. His entire arm nearly trembled. He realized that the White Fox was not merely a quasi-martial artist, he had deliberately been suppressing his true power. The White Fox stared intently and took a deep breath. In the next moment, he unleashed the Thunder Fist, striking the protagonist directly. The impact was violent, and the shockwave surged through the protagonist's entire body. For the first time, he experienced the terrifying force of a true martial artist. In the audience, some recognized the technique and shook their heads, knowing the Minotaur stood no chance. The White Fox continued his assault, unleashing relentless punches while urging the protagonist to reveal his true strength. The protagonist could only defend himself. He knew that if this continued, defeat was inevitable. He searched for an opening, but the White Fox gave none. In a brief lapse in defense, a punch struck the protagonist's face. He was sent crashing to the ground, his vision blurred and his body unresponsive. His consciousness slowly faded as the roar of the arena dulled. The White Fox stepped forward, placing his foot on the protagonist's mask, coldly stating that the prize would not be his. He offered a deal. Join them, and he would get the money. The protagonist refused immediately. The White Fox's expression darkened as he warned that refusal came at a cost. Lying on the floor, the protagonist questioned their dignity as martial artists. Those words shattered the White Fox's last shred of patience. There was no reason to continue talking, so he decided to end it. He declared that he would cripple the protagonist so he would never fight again. As he prepared a powerful kick, the threat echoed in the protagonist's mind, along with memories of his dream and his family's sacrifices. At that moment, the White Fox charged with the finishing kick. At the last second, the protagonist moved and narrowly avoided the attack. The White Fox was shocked. Despite the brutal punishment, the protagonist stood up once more, surrounded by a blazing aura. As he slowly walked forward, he repeated that he would not fall here. The white fox was stunned. Despite everything, the protagonist was still standing. The protagonist thought of his family and all the sacrifices they had made for him. He knew he could not accept a future where he failed. Suddenly, a strange screen appeared before him, asking what he was willing to sacrifice for his faith and family. With a fierce roar, he answered without hesitation that he would sacrifice everything. A terrifying aura erupted from his body and spread violently. The screen asked again if he was prepared to pay the price. The protagonist shouted, "Yes." In the next instant, reality shattered, and he was transported to a strange, digital-like space. Before he could fully grasp what was happening, a massive shadow appeared before him. Moments later, a golden being emerged, radiating an oppressive presence. The being said it would grant him a chance. It slowly faded away, and a thread of golden light enveloped the protagonist. A golden system screen appeared, displaying his attributes, vitality, spirit, and martial skills. He touched the screen and selected the first mission option, a beginner tutorial, defeat the white fox and improve his martial arts. Before he could react, a clone identical to him appeared and immediately attacked. The protagonist relied on instinct to evade the punch. He noticed the clone was using the Vajra fist perfectly, exactly as described in the manual. He recognized it as a perfect instructor and knew he could not waste this opportunity. He charged forward and exchanged blows with the clone. He quickly realized the clone demonstrated the ideal combat form, suppressing him with precise control. The clone showed no mercy. A full power punch struck the protagonist's abdomen, forcing him back with immense force. As he steadied himself, he noticed something strange. His own fist technique was improving at an astonishing rate. A faint smile appeared on his face. He realized this place allowed rapid growth of his abilities. Without hesitation, he charged again, unleashing a barrage of punches in continued intense training. With every collision, his mastery of the Vajra fist increased. He switched to the void step, and its proficiency rose rapidly as well. In a very short time, he nearly reached the limits of his skills. Floating light palm was the first to break through to the micro level, followed by void step. In a decisive exchange, the Vajra fist advanced to the master level. The training ended, and the clone dissolved into fragments of light, leaving the protagonist exhausted and heavy. The system screen appeared again, congratulating him and asking if he wished to return to reality. He agreed. In the blink of an eye, he was back in the underground arena, standing directly before the white fox. Enraged, the white fox charged and unleashed all his power, launching the Thunder Rush fist to end the fight with a single blow. The protagonist easily avoided the attacks. To him, everything seemed to slow down. In the next instant, he moved. His speed was overwhelming, and his punch struck the white fox's face. The mask shattered and fell to the ground in pieces. The protagonist stood there, his gaze cold and resolute. The audience was stunned. They never expected such an outcome. The white fox fell, defeated. The match ended, and the protagonist stood alone in the ring. He looked at the announcer and calmly asked when the prize would be given. In the office, the arena boss turned pale. An apprentice who had mastered the Vajra fist was beyond all expectations. Interest lit up in his eyes as he ordered his subordinates to follow the protagonist and uncover his identity. After receiving the money, the protagonist left and walked through the dark streets. Before reaching home, he sensed danger and turned around. Someone was following him. The pursuers were shocked when he suddenly vanished from their sight. They panicked and searched frantically. Above them, hidden between narrow buildings, the protagonist concealed his presence. Once the danger passed, he safely reached the rooftop. When he returned home, his aunt and uncle were stunned by the money. They asked if he had stolen it. Calmly, he explained that Teacher Lee had helped him after recognizing his talent. He asked them to trust him. Seeing his confidence, they believed him. Their faces filled with joy as they spoke about his future. Later, the protagonist stood alone on the rooftop. He felt relief. The family's financial burden had been resolved. He thanked the system, but noticed something strange. Only his martial skills had changed. A notification appeared explaining that he could use martial value to enhance attributes. Without hesitation, he allocated the points to vitality. His vitality surged as power flowed through his body, surrounding him with a violent aura. Upon checking his status, he had reached the level of a quasi-martial artist. He continued increasing vitality, his wounds vanished and his strength soared. Overflowing with energy, the protagonist leapt across rooftops to test his enhanced body. He decided to verify his strength and went to the school. At the training field, he saw the combat testing machine. Standing before it, he chose to use only 70% of his strength. He launched a punch. It struck the machine, shattered the metal, and completely destroyed it. The protagonist froze, wondering if he would have to pay for the damage. The noise attracted attention, so he quickly left. Moments later, an elderly man in pajamas arrived and flew into a rage at the destroyed machine. He immediately assumed Chen Shan or Li Tu was responsible and vowed to teach the culprit a lesson at the start of class. The next day, all the students gathered in the gymnasium. While standing in line, the protagonist quietly asked why Chen Shan had been beaten. His friend whispered back that Chen Shan was said to be the one who had destroyed the tester outside the drill ground last night. He had refused to admit it, so the teacher punished him. The protagonist smirked to himself, thinking it was obvious that Chen Shan had simply been wrongly accused. Suddenly, the teacher shouted and ordered everyone to be silent. He announced that he had invited his former comrade in arms, a Tier 3 martial artist named Chen Tian, to teach them AC-rank martial art, the Thunder Rush Fist. Everyone was required to learn it. The students began whispering among themselves. One said it was his first time seeing a Tier 3 martial artist. Another said that even C-rank martial arts taught at outside dojos cost hundreds of thousands in tuition. The protagonist recalled that the Thunder Rush Fist had also been used by White Fox against him before, a punch with triple impact and truly terrifying power. If he wanted to learn such a martial art outside, even just the registration fee would cost several $100,000. He immediately decided to seize this opportunity. Chen Tian spoke and reprimanded the students. Fooling around was over. He would demonstrate the Thunder Rush Fist 10 times, from beginning to end, and how much they learned would depend entirely on them. Chen Tian began the demonstration. His footwork was precise, followed by a powerful punch as he explained the principles of the Thunder Rush Fist. The force behind his punch was fierce and dominant. At the basic level, the punch produced a sound like thunder. At the proficient level, 3 sounds could be heard. At the micro level, 5. At the mastered level, 7, which was his current level. And upon reaching the perfect realm, 9 sounds would be produced. However, he warned everyone not to aim too high. It would be enough if they could reach the basic level that day. With a loud shout, he announced the second demonstration and ordered everyone to follow along. The entire row of students moved in sync with Chen Tian. After several hours, most of them were completely exhausted. Some said they had learned nothing, others complained about the difficulty. Some even asked whether there was any hidden secret to the technique. The protagonist's friend was panting heavily, his body trembling from exhaustion. He asked how one was supposed to learn a C-rank martial art like this. When he turned to ask the protagonist what he had learned, he was shocked to find that the protagonist was no longer behind him. His attention was suddenly drawn by Chen Shan's laughter as he announced to their classmates that he had successfully reached the basic level. The protagonist's friend thought to himself that this must be why everyone called Chen Shan a genius. He really did learn quickly. The teacher proudly told Chen Tian that Chen Shan was the #1 genius of the school and asked whether he was interested in guiding him. Chen Tian replied that in another city, such a level would be considered ordinary. After the teaching session, the two of them left immediately. While walking down the stairs, Chen Tian told the teacher that the batch of students was not good. he felt as if he had come for nothing. The principal replied that it was already enough for someone to reach the basic level. Was he really expecting to find a top-tier genius? Chen Tian said that martial cultivation was extremely slow and that talent was crucial. The principal agreed and added that relying solely on effort without opportunity was completely impossible. Suddenly, they both froze when they heard consecutive booming sounds echoing through the area. They immediately searched for the source. Chen Tian recognized it as a 7-sound thunder rush fist. He was shocked. Was there such an expert in the school? The principal said that was impossible. He had never heard of such a person. But when he saw the uniform, he realized it was a student. Chen Tian cried out in disbelief. He had only taught for half a day, and a student had already reached the master level. The protagonist performed the thunder rush fist again. This time, 9 sounds echoed out. The two of them were rooted to the spot. The teacher could not believe it and asked whether his hearing was mistaken. 9 sounds. Chen Tian trembled as he watched. He smiled and said that now he understood everything. He gathered energy into his fist, which became wrapped in orange-colored lightning, and unleashed his own thunder rush fist. 8 sounds rang out, the sound he had long yearned for. The teacher realized that Chen Tian had broken through. Chen Tian happily said that the thunder rush fist he had seen earlier had given him inspiration. Without it, he might never have broken through in his entire life. They immediately jumped down to search for the student, but to their shock, the person was no longer where he had been. The scene shifted to the protagonist walking home. He had not expected cultivating a C-rank martial skill to be so exhausting, far worse than the D-rank Vajra fist. His thunder rush fist had already reached the perfect realm. What he needed next was to find a way to earn martial value and break through as a martial artist as soon as possible. As he checked his system status, he wondered whether martial value could be obtained not only through life and death battles, but also through ordinary sparring. While walking, he arrived at the Raging Thunder Dojo. Upon entering, he saw everyone training with spears. An acquaintance approached and asked why he was there. The protagonist replied that he had just come by to practice. Suddenly, a man kicked one of the trainees. With irritation on his face, he demanded to know whether the student dared to say that his teacher taught poorly. If the student's comprehension was weak, he should admit it instead of making excuses. The protagonist asked what was going on. The acquaintance whispered that the dojo had a new instructor, extremely strong, but disdainful of ordinary people and careless in teaching. His disciple, Li Yan, was also very powerful. Li Yan spoke mockingly as he prepared to punch, saying that someone at this level actually dared to challenge him. Before he could strike, the protagonist grabbed him and said that was enough. Li Yan angrily demanded to know who he was and ordered him to let go. If he had the guts, they should enter the arena and fight one-on-one. The protagonist agreed. But suddenly, the dojo instructor shouted that class was starting. Li Yan snorted and walked away, yelling that the protagonist was lucky. The protagonist watched him with a dark expression and thought that the man was extremely arrogant. The leader began speaking, saying that this would be the last day he taught the Raging Sea Spear technique. Old rules. It would only be demonstrated once. The leader swayed, raised the spear, and looked at the students with mockery. He did not believe anyone would learn it. The protagonist watched every movement seriously. It felt as if his eyes were reflecting the movements directly into his mind. After the demonstration, the leader slammed the spear down and turned away, saying that how much they learned depended on them. Once the door closed, everyone complained. It was shown only once, and they had not even seen it clearly. Meanwhile, the protagonist's determination burned fiercely. He grasped the spear and thought that the essence of the technique was like a dragon roaring through the sea, its momentum like endless waves. He began to swing the spear, and blue energy flowed as his movements continued. His companions were stunned. It was as if he had already learned the technique. Someone asked what kind of prodigy he was, or whether they themselves were just truly incompetent. Suddenly, Li Yan came out and angrily demanded to know who was making noise and who had learned the technique. When he saw the protagonist, he stared seriously and realized that he truly had learned it. He decided to test the depth of his ability. The protagonist stopped his movements when Li Yan said he would guide him. The protagonist agreed. However, the acquaintance warned him that although Li Yan had a bad temperament, he was extremely strong. The protagonist told him not to worry. When the protagonist asked Li Yan to teach him, Li Yan shouted angrily and called him arrogant. He demonstrated the ringing sea spirit technique, micro-level, as his spear shone brightly. Meanwhile, the protagonist closed his eyes, exhaled, and softly said, ringing sea spirit technique, proficient level. Waves of energy enveloped him. Li Yan froze in shock and blurted out, asking how a proficient level ringing sea spirit technique was even possible. When the protagonist unleashed the raging sea spear technique at the proficient level, the blades of their spears collided head-on. The force of the impact sent out a deafening reverberation that shook the very air around them. Li Yan could hardly believe what he was seeing. In his mind, the protagonist was not yet a true martial artist, so how could he have reached the proficient realm of this technique in such a short time? Suddenly, the protagonist's eyes shone with a golden light. He swung his weapon with all his strength, and the sheer force sent Li Yan's spear flying away. At the same time, a golden notification appeared before the protagonist, announcing that he had defeated a martial artist. Despite his lower rank, his martial value increased and reached 35. The protagonist silently stared at the notification, lost in thought. Just as he had expected, even an ordinary sparring match could still grant martial value. In the future, he could look for more sparring partners to accelerate his growth. Meanwhile, Li Yan collapsed to his knees, repeatedly muttering that what had happened was impossible. Thinking it through, he immediately understood the situation. The raging sea spear technique had already reached the proficient realm. This realization filled him with extreme frustration. He himself had endured years of hardship and relentless training just to reach that level. Overwhelmed by emotion, he shouted out loud, questioning what meaning there was left in all his efforts. He suddenly stood up, fury burning as he clenched his fist and prepared to punch the protagonist. However, before his fist could land on the protagonist's face, a sharp voice rang out, stopping him in his tracks. Startled, Li Yan saw his master step between the two of them. Without hesitation, the master walked up to him and struck him hard across the face, followed by a cold reprimand. If he could not accept defeat, then what kind of martial artist was he supposed to be? Li Yan was left stunned. Meanwhile, the master stared at the spear embedded in the floor, deep in thought. He had demonstrated the technique only once, yet the protagonist had already mastered the raging sea spear technique all the way to the proficient realm. Even the so-called geniuses of the imperial capital of Magic City could not achieve something this exaggerated. The master grabbed Li Yan by the head and forced him to bow in front of the protagonist. In his heart, he admitted that Li Yan had talent, but he was far too arrogant. Being slapped awake by a genius of this level was not necessarily a bad thing. Turning to the protagonist, the master admitted that it was his own fault for not disciplining Li Yan strictly enough and apologized for what had happened. The protagonist was confused by the master's sudden change in attitude. Still, after the commotion ended and he left the place, he realized that the day had indeed been exhausting, but he had gained a great deal. Not only had he learned the Thunder Rush Fist and the Raging Sea Spear technique, but he had also earned martial value. As he walked home, he checked his status screen and thought about how to allocate the 35 martial value he had obtained. He remembered that there were only a few days left before the school exam. Wealthy students had already prepared high-end alloy weapons. He, too, needed to prepare his own weapon as soon as possible. In his opinion, he felt most comfortable using a long spear, and it would likely become his main weapon from now on. He needed to buy an alloy long spear. However, the little money he had was not even enough for his aunt's medical treatment, let alone an alloy weapon. He sighed deeply and wondered if there was any other way to earn money. As he walked, he suddenly stopped when he heard a television announcement from a convenience store about the Star City wilderness. Ferocious beasts were increasing in number every day. The city lord was calling on martial artists to hunt ferocious beasts in exchange for generous rewards. The protagonist asked himself whether he should leave the city to hunt ferocious beasts. After a while, he arrived home. Before he could even enter, he heard his aunt scolding his uncle. Hadn't little Hong already given them money the day before? Why did he still need to work so hard? His uncle replied that little Hong was still young, and it made no sense to rely on him to support the family. As long as he could still work, he needed to save up for their future. Their conversation was interrupted when the protagonist walked in and called out to them, saying that he was home. He immediately went to his aunt and suggested that he would take care of the household chores. However, his aunt told him to rest right away, as she always did. The protagonist did not argue. Gently, he took his aunt's hand and placed it on his uncle's back, saying that he was already capable of earning money now. There was no need for his uncle to go out and work anymore. It would be better for him to stay home and take care of his aunt. His uncle smiled warmly. It sounded nice, but he was not used to doing nothing. He even turned to the protagonist, smiled, and gave him a thumbs up, telling him not to worry. He only earned a little to cover daily expenses and did not push himself too hard. His aunt smiled in agreement and said that the protagonist would have even greater expenses in the future for martial arts training. They wanted to save as much as they could for him. The protagonist smiled faintly but did not reply. Deep down, he knew that his uncle and aunt were accustomed to hardship. Unless he earned enough to support them for a lifetime, they would never truly feel at ease enough to rest. He could not miss this opportunity to earn rewards by hunting ferocious beasts. After a while, he returned once again to his usual spot on top of the building. He knew that the wilderness was dangerous, so he needed to strengthen himself first. He invested all of his martial value into vitality. It rose to 95.2, and his body was surrounded by blazing red energy. In his mind, a vitality of 95.2 meant he was only one step away from becoming a true martial artist. After 2 days in the school gymnasium, at midnight, 10:40, his body drenched in sweat, the protagonist lay on the floor. Notifications appeared one after another. His Thunder Rush Fist, Raging Sea Spear Technique, Varja Fist, Floating Light Palm, and Void Step had all reached perfect. He had spent 2 full days in non-stop cultivation, pushing all of his martial skills to the perfect level. He was ready. It was time to leave the city. When Saturday arrived at the Star City martial artist base, he could not hide his excitement. He had finally arrived at a place he had previously only seen on television. Now, he was witnessing it firsthand. The martial artist base, where martial artists who were rarely seen elsewhere filled the streets. As he walked, he read the posted prices. 300 blue star coins for a non-ranked ferocious beast. 1,000 blue star coins for a Tier 1 initial stage ferocious beast. 3,000 for Tier 1 middle stage. 5,000 for Tier 1 high stage. When he read the next line, he froze. The left ear of the slain ferocious beast had to be cut off as proof to receive the reward. Otherwise, there would be no payment. He could not help but curse inwardly at how primitive the method was. While walking, he noticed a man asking a woman for help. He quickly calculated the possible earnings and realized that the bag the woman carried seemed to be filled with the left ears of ferocious beasts. Suddenly, however, his attention was stolen by a commotion behind him. A man shouting, ordering people to move aside, asking whether they couldn't see that the young master had arrived. The protagonist carefully observed the man and realized that his clothing and aura resembled the white fox from the underground boxing ring. He also heard whispers around him. If the man were not the nephew of the person in charge of the base, he would have been beaten long ago. Someone even said they had heard he was beaten badly by someone a few days earlier, and that it had been satisfying. Another person expressed disbelief, saying that must be why they hadn't seen him in recent days. The protagonist looked at the man again and saw him grinning back at him. He returned the same expression before immediately turning away. He knew that danger did not only come from ferocious beasts, but also from other people. He needed to be cautious. When he reached a large gate, the guard told him that he was young and looked like it was his first time going into the wilderness alone. The protagonist nodded in agreement and continued walking out. Watching him leave, the guard thought that he was just an ignorant and fearless kid. Stepping out of the passage, the protagonist set foot on grassy ground and looked over the forested surroundings. With firm determination, he swore to himself that he would return with a large haul. After 2 hours in the forest, the protagonist was frustrated and exhausted. He wondered why he had not encountered even a single ferocious beast. He began to suspect that the monsters near the forest's edge had already been cleared out, so he decided to go deeper inside. He ran forward quickly until he suddenly stopped. A white wolf appeared before him, its eyes glowing red and its body emitting a terrifying presence. The protagonist was not afraid. He immediately realized that this was likely the Tier 1 initial stage ferocious beast described in the books, the Nethermoon wolf. It was also his first time seeing such a creature alive. The wolf let out a loud howl and suddenly lunged forward. It leapt into the air, jumping even higher than him, fully prepared to attack. The chapter ends here. Watch out for our upcoming uploads. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you'll always be updated on our future videos.